I'm Julie Hay, and what you're about to see is a recording of the speech that I was planning to give at the South Asian Association of TA and ITAA conference that was running in Kochi in India in August 2018. Unfortunately, I was unable to get there because of the terrible flooding around that area. So I've come back home and made a recording of what I had been going to say. Hello, I couldn't resist showing my SAATA award for professional excellence that they gave me in 2014. First, I'd like to say why this is appearing on YouTube, for those who don't already know it. They've had the worst floods in almost 100 years in Kerala. There were many deaths, and there are 1 million in rescue camps at the time I'm making this recording. And yet, still, the people there celebrate Onam, as you can see in the picture, with the great flower and pattern arrangements that they make. Meanwhile, I spent 24 hours at Mumbai airport and did my sightseeing there, where I found this wonderful wooden carving. So, moving on to my planned speech, if I had been there. I came to India first in 1993. I had been the ITAA president when the suggestion came through of a conference in India, and I was delighted to support it. When I came, instead of Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. If I remember my Latin correctly from school, my saying should be Veni, Vidi, Victus Sim. I came, I saw, and I was conquered. I fell in love with India. I rode on the back of an elephant in a parade. You can see in the picture me standing beside it. We didn't have selfies on the phone in those days. And I also fell in love with saris, which I would have been wearing if I had been making this speech live. Instead of which, if you can probably see, I have put on some of my colourful Indian clothes, which always look a bit strange in the UK, but I thoroughly enjoy wearing. It moves me out of my mother's script message when she told me that only little girls are allowed to wear sequins. Now, across the years, what I'm going to be looking at is what contributions have found their way out of India. Obviously, I'm not able to comment on what's been circulated and published around in India. I've looked at things like the Transactional Analysis Journal and anywhere else I could find, but I do realise this is a selection only. My apologies if I get it wrong or miss something significant. I'm aware again that I'm doing this with nobody as an audience. If I had been doing it in India, then it would have been even more stressful because some of the authors I would have been talking about would have been sitting there looking at me, but at least then they could have joined in if I've misunderstood. And I would like to say that I will produce an article based on this, so please tell me if I miss anything, get anything wrong, or there's something else I ought to know about. Please let me know. My email address will be at the end of this presentation. Now, starting back 25 years ago, I realised that I still had the brochure from that conference. The theme was sharing and growing, which is a great theme for TA anyway. And my main contacts then were Sister Annie, who unfortunately is now deceased, but she was the one who taught me to wear a sari and also taught me that Carmelite nuns are great businesswomen because she was doing so much to organise the conference. And also my longtime friend, P.K. Saru, who in that brochure wrote about Vipassana and how that fitted in with TA. So way, way back, we're already seeing contributions. Also, just to make the point that people in India are good fun as well, in that brochure there were several cartoons. Here's one of them. If you're having trouble seeing the screen large enough, the words say, just for once, could we have a good old-fashioned fight without moving into ego state analysis? Now, moving on from that, before 1993, there were three main people contributing to TA in India: Father George, Oz Somerton, who I always heard referred to as Oz, but was in fact Father Oz as well, and of course Pearl Drago, who was given an Eric Byrne Memorial Award. In terms of Father George, with Sister Candida, he wrote about spirituality, suggesting that autonomy was the door to spirituality, that it might be with God or with the universe or with nature or with a person that you have your connection. That prompts me to think about what I've often wondered, that I'm okay, you're okay is a bit like a TA religious belief. We sometimes need to be careful that we don't sound too much like we're preaching when we tell people that. I also thought about spirituality and religion, which of course are clearly different, and mused about and invite you to think about how Father George and Father Oz were both Jesuits. They created ITAA and TASI, the two main TA associations, and when I look at them and then I look back, both made it very clear that they were for everyone. It didn't matter about religion, caste, ethnic origin, anything at all. TA and the TA associations in India emphasized that they were for everyone. And then, of course, I remembered that Eric Byrne was Jewish. I'm an atheist, so it gets really interesting, and I invite you to think about your own religion and spirituality as a contribution from India for us to think about this. Now, in terms of others who have written significant things, obviously Father George, I've already mentioned, Oz Somerton, Pearl Drago, I mentioned, P.K. Saru and others, Surya Prakash and other co-authors, and then there are some others. So that's just to give you a bit of structure of what I'm now going to be talking about. Oz Somerton, he gets a little map of this all on his own because he had so many interesting ideas. I'm not going to read those all out to you because I am going to talk about each one of them. Starting with Rani, Relationship Analysis Inventory, where the code is, if it's a capital letter U, it's whether I like you or not. And if it's a capital letter C, whether I like what you do or not. And what he suggested was we could look at relationships in terms of how the stroking combination works and what that means in terms of the relationship type. Sympathy, antagonism, antipathy or indifference, with varying combinations of whether I like you or I don't like you, and whether I like what you do or not. Next, the parental flip, fun idea that shows how when someone is addressed from the parent in one person to their child ego state, they flip so that they move to their own parent and come back from that. Rainbow specks, fun way of looking at things. What Oz Somerton said was this makes it easier sometimes for teaching lay people rather than having to use all the TA jargon. The idea is that as we look out on the world, we've got different colours to name the different frames of reference that we're using from the different ego states. Moving on to a bit more theoretical material, game models. He summarized how Byrne had game models based on transactions and the game formula. Robert Golding looked at the intrapsychic dynamics. Toby Kaler suggested the mini-script. Steve Cartman suggested the very well-known drama triangle. Jackie Schiff and her colleagues had the redefining hexagon, and Finita English looked more at racketeering. Now, I'm aware that I'm mentioning lots of jargon there. In the time for this speech, I'm not going to go into details, but my intention is to intrigue you and interest you. I will give a full reference list at the end so that you can follow up on any of these, especially if you realize you haven't heard of them yet. What Oz Somerton added to that was the game pentagon. So he had the various roles that you can see there. What he said was, these are social slots, yeah? So not to be confused with the drama triangle. These are a range of ways we can behave socially, and they may be positive or they may be negative. What he then did was showed how this could be combined with the drama triangle, in that each one of those roles could be negative in the sense that the person is on the drama triangle, but they may not be. It may just be a positive use of that role. And he added to this by talking about there being two planes, so that we can think about the pentagon as on one dimension, and then the drama triangle being on the vertical dimension, and therefore it can move across again so that you can be positive or negative in terms of your pentagon role. Next, he followed that up with the game spectrum, where he was emphasizing that we should look at organizational dynamics when we're looking at games and not just what the individual players are doing. So you can see there that he talks about the intrapsychic and interpersonal dynamics of the individual, but he also looks at the intragroup and the intergroup analysis. And between the two, there is colloquial game analysis in terms of what is actually going on. Another one, which I thought was particularly interesting, was upside down rackets. That's his diagram. A real feeling is confused with a racket or a forbidden feeling. So, for example, if tiredness was allowed to you as a child, but you were not allowed anger, it may be that when you really feel tired when you're grown up, you experience it as if it's your racket feeling. Because it's therefore a substitute feeling, you get a negative payoff. Some other additions that Oz suggested, he pointed out that from Byrne, we tend to group it into ego states, transactions, games, and script. And I certainly remember that that was almost like the mantra when we were doing exams. Did people know about all of those? Oz suggested many years ago that we should add another section for relationship analysis and another one for group analysis. The group analysis one would seem to make quite a lot of sense, as we do tend to examine people on the basis that they can work with individuals as well as groups. Right, moving on, Pearl Drago. Again, several ideas that have come from Pearl. Again, I won't read them out. I'm going to mention each of them. She suggested we might move from Byrne's models, the ways he talked about diagnosing an ego state as well, into thinking of what paradigms they mean we're using when we do our thinking. So for the phenomenological, she suggested that is an experiential paradigm. For historical, it's a biographical paradigm. For behavioral, it's metaphorical. I think people sometimes forget that ego states are metaphors. You can't actually slice someone open and find them. And then finally, for the social, Maybe it's a relational paradigm. Lots of information about the adult ego state. Pearl Drago divided that up into the photographic adult, which perceives and classifies things, and a combining adult, which hypothesizes and decides. She also wrote of it as a dispassionate observer, as being fully present in the here and now, rather like Byrne did, and adding an Indian slant to this, that means that there is no karma from the past or the present. You have to accept that what is happening now is what is happening now. And she also likened the adult in this sense to the witnessing self, or the seer, the one who is seeing. She suggested an altruistic model of ego states, i.e., if we have an updated integrated parent ego state, we will have potency. An updated integrated adult means we take responsibility, and an updated integrated child means we feel that we have security, and those combined allow us to be altruistic. New permissions. She suggested that we could have be holy, experience God, and this would be a challenge to arrogance, to accept that there is a power greater than us, and a permission of it's okay to fight for justice, which would mean that we can experience community. And this is a challenge to narcissism, casteism, and exclusivism. Then the one that Pearl Drago is probably best known for, the idea of cultural parent, taking Byrne's ideas about etiquette, technicalities, and character, and showing them in ovals instead, put inside the parent ego state, so that what we are being passed on is etiquette, technicalities, and character, which relate to whatever was appropriate when our real parent, with a small p, was growing up. And then, really interesting, the cultural shadow. This idea that we absorb that, we somehow swallow it, introject it into our own child, into our P1, our parent in the child, and therefore we just feel that it has to be correct. We don't have any logic involved in this. And she explains that the shadow is why an oppressed person seems to believe that they are meant to be oppressed. Why people will argue that, well, this is the way it is, this is our culture, this is how it is meant to be. Leading on from that, Pearl also wrote about the ethnic child, pointing out first that we all have ethnicity. This is not meant to be just about what tends to get called in the West ethnic minorities. It's like we're all ethnic. We are all biophysically and culturally conditioned. What we need is a healthy ancestral parent passing on the messages. Pearl also used an example of a child in India where she was giving the child permissions, and that seemed to be working fine. But then she realized that there is a big danger of the parent becoming a false universality. What she meant by that, and I think those of us who travel see this every time we go to an airport where the same shops are there, that the danger is that we lose our own particular culture and we adopt some kind of universal culture, meaning that we decide we all want to eat McDonald's and we all want our clothes from the same famous designers, and we all start eating the food that gets the most publicity. her final comment on the ethnic child was that if there is a genuine altruistic and ecological universal parent, then that child can become the illumined child bonded with the divine parent. Something definitely for us to think about, especially as we spread the TA philosophy around the world. Now, some more. Again, I'm not going to read them out, but this time I've shown you some names and I've also shown you some of the ideas that I'm going to briefly mention. The Guru, Sashi Chandran, Saru and others have written about this. Sashi in particular wrote that the Guru is within us all. We all have our own Guru. From India, we get many specific approaches to plurality and diversity. I know that in India that doesn't always work, but it does work amazingly well when you think about what some other countries are like with their diversity issues. That links in, for Saru and others, into the idea of multiple relationships for TA training. I know that that's what happened when I did my early TA training. When there are only a few people there teaching TA, you can't really expect to keep close, fixed boundaries between who trains, who supervises, who does therapy and so on. But that works okay, provided you are all used to dealing with plurality and diversity. It also works okay when you keep in mind that a guru models, they do not teach. That means that they must have absorbed the TA and used it on themselves so that they come across as authentic. So they are modeling, this is how to be. That authenticity is what then leads to trust, and other people can then deal with maybe the need for mixed roles. And underlying all of that is the need for the guru, whoever that may be, and that of course can be anyone, to have integrated the TA and that it is part of their essence now and not just something that they talk about or teach about but haven't done themselves. Moving on to ethics, Surya Prakash has written about this. Now, this is where I hope I don't say anything too ridiculous, because I confess now that I have not spent a lot of time studying all of the Indian philosophical ideas. I have picked out what I think the authors mean when they are writing about it and what I think is really interesting. So, Dharma, which may mean many things apparently, but may mean that we are complete in ourselves and we are also all part of the whole. And Surya says that Dharma earns the karma being what happens to us. Vedanta, just like TA, emphasizes self-control. It also focuses on the fact that we do have the power to shape our own destiny, just like TA. Gita emphasizes that everything is within a larger system and that over the longer term and through nature, things will balance out. Santana Dharma emphasizes again that we are all part of something which is the whole. So I'm reminded of the focus on systemic TA in the West, and the Upanishads include the idea that our ignorance or our apparent ignorance and doing wrong things is due to our strong need for attachment, i.e. we allow our need for attachment to override our being in the here and now and working out what we could do for ourselves. I hope that captures well enough what Surya was intending to say. I'm sure he's going to let me know otherwise afterwards. Now, Surya and Gita also took some of these ideas and looked at what is it like if we are spiritually integrated, and how does that look on an ego state model. So they have Pearl Drago's ovals for the cultural parent, the etiquette, technicalities, and character, and they link these to some of the other concepts. So I've put you some notes at the side as well, that Tat Tvamasi is about Atma is or reflects Brahman. Brahman against adult is universal consciousness. For the technicalities, I've already mentioned Dharma and Karma. Yoga means union. And for the character within the parent, Sthita Prajna means equanimity. So we need our child in our parent to be having equanimity. What happens is what happens. Rather like I needed to do when I was stuck at Mumbai airport for 24 hours and could not get through to Kochi, and therefore could not take the exam I was planning to take, could not do this speech live, could not run my pre-conference workshop or my conference workshop or the TW that I was meant to lead afterwards. I certainly needed lots of Sthita Prajna at that point. The adult is, I am the whole, I have a universal consciousness, and child is Satchinandana, which is that we have bliss from our awareness of the truth, which Surya and Gita point out is similar to the TA concept of physis. Now, they also looked at what happens with a contamination. So, parent contaminating adult means that we feel we are incomplete. The adult then believes that we are our mind, body, sense complex only, and our child is contaminating in terms of our strong attachment to our own likes and dislikes. And those contaminations are spiritual contaminations, which they also point out is why people are afraid of death instead of accepting that death is something that comes. The Atma, our spirit, then moves on to another body. Surya and Susan George, something a bit more practical here, conflict strategies, where the M is my convictions about my ideas, and the Y is my convictions about your ideas. Again, if you get interested, follow this one up because they have a lot of other diagrams there that I don't have time to present, showing how various combinations mean we get cooperation or synergy or creativity or cooperation. And if we can put all of those together, we can then get consensus instead of conflict. Another practical, really interesting idea from Priya is what is called the 3Ps, or 3 permissions wheel. Again, have a look at this in more detail. The hub represents the permissions, and then there are several permissions here that are all the ones that are needed. The spokes represent protection, and the circle itself represents potency, plus a reminder that obviously none of this works without the client's acceptance of the permission. Really nice summary and a really nice technique for working with clients to review what permissions they need. Another practical item, Surya and Mohan Raj write about the transactional imago, which they use with groups, particularly useful when you're working with teams in organizations. And again, no time to go through all of these, but you can see that they suggest that from that, we can produce things like a perceptual table of how each person perceives others, an individual functional effectiveness score. There's a transactional wheel showing who's transacting with whom. That gives you an individual transactional effectiveness. There's a functional matrix, and then you can get a group functional effectiveness rating as well. Now, just a final thought, while I was looking at what I'd got and finding that I'd still got the old conference brochure, and several others for that matter. I've been going back to India quite a few times. 1995, a book. 2006, a book. 2017, a nice new book that's come out. Just a few examples. I know there are many, many more. And of course, the big advantage is that they're all written in English, especially for me. Pulling this together then, because I've now just thrown at you loads and loads of different ideas that I see as contributions from India. Lots of practical ideas and models, which I've mentioned, and which hopefully you'll follow up on. And then the other theme has to be the cultural and spiritual theme that keeps coming through, and which links so much to the TA concept of autonomy. I now have 5 parts to autonomy, rather than Byrne's 3. I tend to be known for my donkey bridges, Eselsbrücken in German, although I'm told when I say it, I sound like it's good Dutch. Donkey bridges are ways of helping people remember things. Hence, these all start with the same letter. It certainly helps me remember. If you hate that, misery is optional, just change the words. But what I use is awareness, as did Byrne, and using the contributions from India, that awareness is this universal awareness. It's knowing we are part of the whole. Alternatives, which Byrne referred to as spontaneity when he said we need to know we have options, the contribution here is that it is not your karma. You can't say these things just happen to me. You have to make some choices. Attachment, Byrne referred to as intimacy, contribution from India, is to recognize that that attachment can be with God, can be with nature, or can be with another person. I then add in authenticity in the sense that we also need that if we're going to achieve the rest of the aspects of autonomy. And what I think is significant there is we must be our real selves, because we have an inner guru and we will be a guru for others, and therefore we need to model the TA philosophy, the learning that we get from TA. And then the 5th element is accountability. And what interested me there, and I haven't mentioned these ideas yet, Guru Dakshina means we all have a 5-fold debt to others, basically to the universe, to the seas and rivers and forests, to animals and so on. So we have a debt basically to the world that we need to be conscious of. And a more specific word is rin, which is we have a debt to our teachers. That to me seems particularly relevant with how TA works. By giving this speech, I am paying back part of my debt to my teachers. Whenever I go around passing on TA, especially when I'm doing this pro bono, I'm not charging people for it. This is me paying off the debt to my teachers, all those people before me that I learned TA from. And in this particular case, it's part of my debt to the teachers that I have been talking about. Father George, was Somerton, Pearl Drago, Saru, Syria, and everybody else whose name I have mentioned. Finally, I looked up things about India in Google, prompted actually by Saroj Welch, who wrote something about this but many, many years ago. There are 6 main ethnic groups. In 2001, there were 1,721 different languages. In 2018, this year, there are 1.35 billion people. That means the population of India has doubled in 40 years. That means that 1 in 6 of the world's population live in India. And at that point, I want to talk about a joke that used to be told many years ago when people were learning about marketing, because I think it's relevant. The joke was about 2 salespeople who worked for different shoe manufacturers in the West, and they both went to Africa, and they both sent back, in those days, telex messages or cables. And one of them said, "Waste of time, I'm coming home, no market here, nobody wears shoes in Africa." The other one telex back and said, "Fantastic, wonderful market, nobody wears shoes in Africa yet." And I'm thinking, wow, 1 in 6 of the world's population. There's already been an awful lot happening to spread TA in India. We need to get on with that and do a lot more of it for so many people. So I invite all of you to contribute to that in whatever way you can. Now, my references, there are quite a few of them. As I said, I'm also going to produce this as an article. If you want to look at the references, rather than me putting in a PowerPoint and using several slides, there's the access for you. And what I will do is make this PowerPoint available to people. The message will no doubt go out to everyone who was at the conference or tried to get to the conference, so that you can follow it up. And finally, those are my details, the usual piece of marketing at the end of a speech. The main thing is, please let me know what you think I've missed, what you think of what I've said, how it could be extended, anything I've got wrong. My email is julie@juliehay.org. So fairly easy to remember because it's my name. And I will say goodbye at that point.